Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the York Festival of Ideas and the Complex Trauma Institute, to Fear in the Therapy Room. And we're going to start in a perhaps different way by getting ourselves into a good place for reflection. So, can I ask you just to get yourself sitting comfortably, either drop your eyes or close your eyes, switch your brain off, focus all of your attention on sensations in the body as you breathe in and out. Just natural breath, don't change anything. Cool air coming into the nostrils, warm air going out. Let's just stay with that for a minute or two. Okay, let's begin. My aim in this talk is to lift the lid on what happens in the therapy room between a counsellor or a psychotherapist and their client. How does therapy work? Why does it sometimes not work? And what on earth has this got to do with fear? In answering these questions, I really need to point out that I can only share my own experience and understanding. Every therapist practices in their own unique way. And every therapeutic relationship with a different client is unique. And some therapists use approaches I haven't trained in, and vice versa. But I've sat in the client's chair for nearly 400 hours. So I know something about what it feels like to be a client. And I've sat in the therapist's chair for well over 15,000 hours. So I know a bit about that too. Just a note about confidentiality. Names and incidental details in the examples that I'm going to share have been changed. But where I thought that wasn't sufficient, I've obtained written consent from my clients for using their stories. So let's start with an example of fear in the therapy room. My client Christopher came to me for help with anxiety, which was making his job really difficult and stressful and cutting him off from his friends. In our first session, I thought the work might be quite hard, but I didn't have any real concerns. But when he came to the second session, things started to get difficult. Christopher arrived looking agitated and started the session talking very fast with great emphasis about something that he seemed to be saying that I needed to know. But I couldn't follow what he was saying, and none of my questions seemed to connect or get any response. The harder I tried to understand, the more confused I got. And then a thought occurred to me that he might be suffering a psychotic episode. That's completely losing touch with reality. This alarmed me, and my mind went blank. Realizing that my fear system was well and truly aroused, I stopped trying to follow Christopher's words. I took some breaths and I tried to calm myself and observe what was happening to me. I noticed my own agitation and disconnectedness, my fear of the state that Christopher was in. I asked myself, what's he trying to say to me? I sensed the desperate urgency with which he was talking. This really mattered to him. Then the thought came to my mind, he's terrified that he's going mad. And at the same time, a picture came into my head of an astronaut whose connection to the spacecraft had got severed, drifting off into endless black space. I thought I'd share my idea, but then I thought I might be completely wrong and make a real mess of things. So I had a moment's panic. I waited till that subsided, and then I just said what I was thinking. I wonder if you're scared that you're going mad. Christopher suddenly stopped, looked me straight in the eye for the first time, took a big deep breath and said, "Yes, that's it." We looked at each other for a moment, real sense of connection. Then we started working on what lay behind his terror, both of us having recovered the capacity to think and reflect. Before commenting on this example, I want to give an overview of the framework of thinking that informs my work. Everything I'm going to be talking about today relates to two powerful biological systems. You could call them two forces, fear and love. And the balance between these forces within each one of us determines whether we live a life of contentment or a life of misery and discontent. I'm only going to give a very brief overview of these two systems. If you want a more detailed account, you can find it in my two previous York Festival of Ideas talks, which can be accessed on YouTube simply by searching under my name. The focus of today's talk is on the process of therapy and how it can heal. As I see it, the essential activity that happens in the therapy room is an attempt to shift the balance away from being stuck in fear and towards strengthening our ability to regulate fear, to be socially connected, to love. So let's look briefly at the fear system. The human fear system consists of our body's most ancient responses to threat, which we share with most animals. There are three different responses, which I call fear alert, fear arousal, and fear collapse. The first response, fear alert, is triggered when danger is sensed at a distance. We don't yet know how much of a threat it is, so we scan the environment. Our hearing, sight, and sense of smell become more acute to detect the danger, and slight changes happen in our body which prepare it for extreme action should that be necessary. When humans experience fear alert, we are tense, often holding our breath, wary, and anxious. Like when we're all alone in a strange house at night, and then we hear a floorboard creak. The second response, fear arousal, is triggered when danger is close. The predator starts its attack, or someone pulls a knife on you, but there's still a chance of escape. A number of major changes happen in the body, which creates a sudden huge burst of available energy. And this makes the prey animal instantly much stronger and faster, so it can run or fight to escape being eaten, or so we can run or fight to avoid being stabbed. This response is commonly known as fight or flight. And it's important to note that the fight part is actually a kill or be killed response. But we can also go into a freeze state if we're not sure what to do, and our muscles just lock in terror, a bit like the poor marmot in the picture. When humans are in a state of fear arousal, we can feel a huge upwards moving rush of energy, such as when you really lose your temper with someone. In fear arousal, we run or lash out, or we might go rigid in terror or panic. We can't concentrate on anything but the danger, and we lose our ability to think reflectively. The third response, fear collapse, is triggered when the danger is so close there seems no escape. The predator has seized its prey. In humans, it's likely to activate most powerfully when a state of terror is combined with a feeling of being trapped. So it's often experienced when a person is raped. It involves a sudden collapse of energy production throughout the body. The muscles lose all their tension and go limp, and much of the brain switches off. This enables a prey animal to appear dead to a predator, which has the effect of switching off the predator's impulse to attack. And that sometimes offers a last chance for escape, if the predator gets distracted by competitors. As humans, we can experience fear collapse at different levels of intensity, ranging from simple low mood to depression, feeling wobbly and faint, brain fog, or having thoughts about being useless and hopeless, to having sensations of feeling out of body or unreal, experiencing extreme exhaustion, or ultimately physical collapse. So my definition of the fear system is evaluating the danger and preparing for action, fear alert, huge energy boost to escape danger, fear arousal, and sudden energy shutdown, offering a last slim chance of survival, fear collapse. If we graph this up on the basis of heart rate and blood pressure, the fear system, when it's functional, would look like this. In the case of an animal attacked by a predator, going into fight flight, being caught, and going into fear collapse. But then when the predator was distracted, switching back to fight flight, escaping to a place of safety, and calming down, with the fear system switching off. Now, the fear system is vital. None of us will be alive today without it, but it evolved in response to threats of fairly short duration. When a predator attacks, the prey either escapes quite quickly or they're dead. When we encounter threats that go on for too long and there's no place of safety, our fear system can become dysfunctional. The biological processes that switch it off when we're in a safe place become ineffective. So our fear system remains continuously activated, and we get stuck in what I call fear mode. And this converts our functional graph into this dysfunctional one, where in the absence of a place of safety, we stay stuck in the anxious and wary fear alert state. And because this is a highly volatile state, all sorts of threats that aren't actually life-threatening continuously trip us into fear arousal and fear collapse. And the consequences of this are disastrous. These biological processes have a major impact on the body, and over time, this can lead to chronic physical illnesses, chronic pain and fatigue. We can become anxious or aggressive or depressed, withdrawn, self-attacking, addicted to substances and self-destructive habits, unable to be thoughtful and reflective, and struggling to make and sustain relationships or cooperate socially. We can end up living lives of misery and discontent. Now, let's look briefly at love, a word used and abused in many contexts. But its core lies in a complex set of biological processes which the psychologist Stephen Porges described as our social engagement system. This system opens up a new way of responding to danger. Rather than being solely reliant on fear arousal or fear collapse in the face of threat, it enables us to turn to others for help, support, or care. Stephen Porges points out that it's impossible to live socially unless we can restrain the kill or be killed instincts of our body's fear responses, a truth that is readily apparent in the conflicts of today's world. This restraint is a key function of the social engagement system. And as part of this restraint, it provides us with a signaling mechanism, which allows us to evaluate whether another person is safe to be with or not. This signaling mechanism consists of picking up micro movements in the muscles involved in facial movement, in posture, and in tone of voice. Where these indicate danger, such as the twitch of the upper lip in a snarl, a tense posture, or raised voice, the social engagement system shuts down, allowing our fear responses to activate and protect us. But where these micro movements indicate safety, such as a smile, a relaxed posture, or a calm voice, it lowers our heart rate and it shuts down the fear system. So to summarize, when we get stuck in fear mode, the constant high energy burn of fear arousal exhausts us and drains us of energy. Fear isolates us and creates a complex tangle of ailments and difficulties. But when our social engagement system activates, the energy drain ceases, so we experience a surge of vitality. Our mind recovers the ability to think reflectively. Without the constant focus on danger, we have the time along with the energy for the things that really interest us. We're drawn towards social contacts, and we feel a sense of bonding, belonging, and well-being. What's not to like? Being stuck in fear mode over a long period of time is another way of talking about complex trauma, the complicated impact on our lives of a fear system that can't switch off properly, even when we're no longer in danger. Complex trauma actually covers a wide spectrum of human experience. At one end of the spectrum, we have complex PTSD, which hugely disrupts normal functioning. While at the other end, we have chronic low-grade anxiety and lack of confidence, which limits our ability to live full and satisfying lives. And in between these two extremes, we have most of human life. I don't think I know anyone untouched by trauma. I see the human race as a traumatized species, only part way through its evolution, from being dominated by fear responses to being fully social, cooperative beings. Being stuck in fear mode, where we get triggered into powerful fear responses by threats that aren't actually life-threatening, creates the conditions of complex trauma that prompt us to seek therapy, such as low mood, depression, fatigue, anxiety, panic, uncontrolled anger, isolation, addictions, relationship difficulties and breakups, unresolved bereavement, lack of confidence, self-harm, self-criticism, inability to stand up for ourselves, loss of meaning and purpose, and existential dread. These all originate in the misery and distress of being stuck in fear mode. So the two key tasks of the therapist, as I see it, are to assist the process of regulating unnecessary fear responses, thus restoring energy, thinking, and the capacity to be sociable. And once this is sufficiently in place, we can then assist and encourage the client's own exploration of the issues which brought them to therapy. Regulating our fear responses so that they don't constantly activate and overwhelm us is actually a lifelong task for all of us, and as important a task for the therapist as it is for the client. Indeed, I would contend that the therapist's work on regulating their own fear system is their most important qualification for offering this help to others. Right, we've been going for a bit, and I think we're due another rest. So let's just shut our brains down for a moment. So if you'd like to drop your gaze or close your eyes and do nothing but focus all your attention on the sensations in the body caused by your breathing, either the air going in and out of the nostrils or the chest rising and falling. And this far in, our bodies might actually need a bit of re-energizing. So if you have mobility problems, just ignore me and do your own thing. But I'd invite you maybe to, just turn this around, maybe you could just stand up and sit down a few times just to get the blood flowing in the body. And then to get rid of the tension in the lower spine, maybe just rotate just a little bit to massage the lower back. Take tension out of our shoulders by giving them a good roll backwards and forwards. Take tension out of our neck by letting our head go around and back. And then if you wear specs, you might have to pop them on top of your head. One of my favorite waking up things is give the face a really good rub. Right. I don't know about you, but that helped me. So with the fear system and the social engagement system in mind, let's consider what happens in the therapy room. To return to the example I started with, my client Christopher, who was overwhelmed by his emotions and feared he was going mad. His terror was such that he couldn't communicate coherently. And this triggered my fear system to the extent that I couldn't think properly. I had to detach and calm myself in order to bring my thinking back online and to be able to reflect on what my body was sensing. I had to calm myself again when I was going to share my thoughts, but then thought I might just be wrong and make things even worse. I had to make sure that my response didn't come out of a place of fear, but out of calm reflection. Well, as calm as I was able to get. What I was able to offer Christopher in this session was empathic understanding, an attempt to put myself into his shoes and then convey that back to Christopher so he knew he'd been understood. Empathic understanding is one of 3 core conditions which Carl Rogers claimed that the therapists must be able to offer in order to foster the personal growth of their clients. In other words, these core conditions are necessary in order for therapy to work. His other 2 conditions were acceptance, which he also termed unconditional positive regard, and genuineness, which he also called congruence. And that's when the body's nonverbal signals, the micro movements I was talking about earlier, actually match what we say and do. Carl Rogers' core conditions can also be framed from a fear system perspective, because genuineness, acceptance, and empathic understanding are the very conditions that convey a sense of safety to another person. And that sense of safety activates the social engagement system and switches off the fear system. We can see just how powerful this biological process is by the speed with which Christopher's intense fear arousal was shut down and social connection and reflective thinking were re-established once a sense of safety was created by empathic understanding. Another way we can describe the genuine, accepting, and empathic approach is that we're making sure that our clients are met as a person. I guess most of us have struggled with being met in other ways. I'm sure many of us have experience of being met as a nuisance or a problem or a medical diagnosis. Or we may feel that we're met as someone of no importance, someone with the wrong views, someone seen as a threat. When we're met in all these ways, our fear system activates. When we're met as a person, we're met just as we are, with interest and curiosity, warmth and concern. To be met in this way is to be welcomed. And welcome is a place of safety where the fear system can switch off. And this is important because fear undermines the work of therapy. The task of welcome and providing the conditions of safety in which complex difficulties can be explored and resolved is not straightforward. And the therapy is often a battleground between the forces of fear and love, creating turbulence for both client and therapist. Clients frequently approach the therapist in a state of fear arousal, sensing the therapist as a threat. I remember once going into my therapist's house and seeing a big spider's web just by the front door with a huge spider in the middle of it. And I thought, I know just how a fly feels. A client in fear arousal is very likely to trigger fear arousal in the therapist. They might do this by getting into a worrying state, as we saw with Christopher, or by responding to the therapist with disparaging or dismissive comments or angry behavior. As a therapist in these circumstances, I would often experience my fear system being triggered as a powerful tension in the shoulders, sometimes accompanied by raised heart rate, sweating, or dry mouth. I would have anxious thoughts about not knowing what to do or say next. My mind would go blank. That really ramps up the fear when you're supposed to be the therapist. In the early years of my practice, I just survived such sessions as best I could. But once I learned about the fear system, I was able to notice these things and start to down-regulate my over-aroused metabolism, by which I mean lower my heart rate and blood pressure by paying attention to the sensations of my body and changing my pattern of breathing. Once I'd recovered my ability to think properly, I could then help my client to calm their fear responses. So much for fear arousal. When the work of therapy touches on really difficult past memories, the client may be triggered into a state of fear collapse. And that's a physical shutdown affecting all the cells of the body, including brain cells. So, as well as feeling collapsed and heavy, people in this state lose the ability to think. They can't hear properly what the therapist is saying. They can't make sense of it or remember it afterwards. And when this happens, it also affects the therapist. There have been times in the course of therapy sessions when I've been overcome by a wave of exhaustion, my arms and legs feeling heavy as lead, my eyelids really heavy. Like, when you're driving a car very late at night and you're just struggling to keep your eyes open, desperate to get home. In the early years of my practice, I had little idea what was going on in these circumstances. Once I learned about fear collapse, I would check how I'd been feeling just before the session. If I'd been completely on the ball for the previous client, that suggested that my body was responding to my current client's fear collapse. Then I would know I needed to start waking myself up by moving, reestablishing a good posture, and changing my pattern of breathing in order to speed up my heart rate. This is referred to as upregulation. Once I'd regulated and re-energized myself, I could then help my client to upregulate in the same way. So I'm just sharing the screen again to give a brief summary of what I've covered in that last section on what happens in the therapy room. We try to meet our clients with empathic understanding, as with Christopher, with acceptance and genuineness, and we're aiming to meet them as a person. However, fear undermines the work of therapy. In fear arousal, client and therapist see each other as a threat. We can't think reflectively, and we need to downregulate the metabolism, slowing our breathing and our heart rate. In fear collapse, we can't think, we can't hear properly, we can't understand or remember. So we need to upregulate the metabolism, move, change our breathing to speed up heart rate. I talked earlier about meeting the client as a person. This is right at the core of therapy, and it has a powerful effect on regulating fear responses. But over the past 30 plus years, as our understanding of trauma has grown, there have been important developments in the practice of psychotherapy based on what we now know of the impact of trauma on the body. You see, our fear responses are primarily physical and physiological responses. And when we get stuck in fear mode, this gives the body a real hammering, which is highly detrimental in the long term. And it includes developing chronic tension, habitual shallow breathing, chronic stress hormone production, and a long-term weakening of our nervous system's ability to regulate our heart rate. And these conditions make it even more likely that our fear system will stay continuously active. Because of this impact of trauma on the body, the more severe the trauma, the less effective pure talking therapies may be. We've learned that we need to help our clients work with the body as well as the mind. Our body's fear responses can be very powerful. And when powerful things happen within our body and we don't understand them, it scares the life out of us, throwing us even deeper into fear. An important first step is to educate our clients about the way the fear system impacts the body so they can stop being afraid of their fear responses. But while this understanding can help us to tolerate these responses, it isn't enough. We need to work with the body to try to reduce the impacts of fear. One of these impacts, as I've said, is chronic tension, and that prevents the fear system from resetting. So here's an example of working to alleviate this using a method called focusing-oriented therapy, which seems to me to have close parallels with Vipassana meditation. My client, Sally, came to see me with anxiety and depression. She wasn't long married, but thoughts about possibly having a baby terrified her and made her miserable. As a child, she'd been burdened by responsibility well beyond her years. She'd felt she had to make things better for her father, who was depressed, and her mother, who complained all the time. So it's no wonder that the prospect of taking complete responsibility for another being felt overwhelming. However, when we tried thinking directly about her fears of having a baby, we got nowhere. So we changed to an approach which gives very slow and focused attention to sensations in the body. Sally told me that at the age of 12 years, she had had an accident where she was hit by a car. At the roadside, she was attended by the driver of the car, who was absolutely furious with her, and by a very distressed teacher who had just told her it had been safe to cross the road. Later in hospital, she felt she had to convince her parents that she was fine so that they wouldn't get too upset. So in the aftermath of the accident, there had been no place of safety, either by the roadside or in the hospital. This is important because when we can't find a place of safety after a major blow or threat, our fear system doesn't deactivate. And that's when we get stuck in fear mode. After she told me about the accident, I invited Sally to check out what was happening in her body. What sensations was she noticing? She told me she could feel tension in her calf muscle in her left leg, and then remembered that that was a leg that was injured in the car accident. I asked her to close her eyes and give all her attention to that sensation. And we did this for almost 10 minutes, with me occasionally asking her to describe the sensation and note whether it was just the same or had changed in any way. And after about 10 minutes, this tension just dissipated, but was immediately replaced by tension in her right shoulder blade. I encouraged her to give all of her attention to this sensation. Once again, eyes closed, just noticing it. We did this for several more minutes. Suddenly there was an audible crack, which really surprised both of us. And she reported that the tension had completely gone from her shoulder. And from that point on, Sally's level of general anxiety dropped significantly. Her mood improved. And over the next few weeks, she reported being able to state her own needs and establish boundaries with her parents. And shortly afterwards, she became pregnant, and we finished our work just before the baby was due, with her feeling more grounded and more mentally prepared for becoming a mother. Now, up to this point, Sally had been unable to relax and deactivate her fear system, even in the safe context of the therapy room, because her body was chronically tense. However, when her muscles were able to fully relax following the focusing work, her fear system deactivated and her anxiety and depression dropped away. The crack we heard, which was just the same as we might experience when an osteopath manipulates our joints, has only actually happened on 2 occasions during my practice. But the loss of tension and the alleviation of anxiety which go with it is something that's happened frequently when I've used this method. As well as sometimes using this way of working, I'd also encourage my clients to make use of complementary therapies such as massage, acupuncture, or osteopathy as a means of treating chronic tension and thereby greatly assisting the work of therapy. Excuse me. Another really important reason we might need to work with the body's responses to threat in order to heal trauma is the fact that the primary way that the fear system deactivates is when the body's physical impulses in face of danger, such as running, hitting, biting, or warding off, are worked through to completion. In other words, when we run far enough to feel safe, or when our fist or foot connect with and incapacitate an aggressor. When these responses are interrupted by fear collapse, we may need afterwards to reconnect and complete them. If they're not completed, there's a danger of getting stuck in a depressive paralysis, which could be accompanied by habitual submissive ways of relating to others. In other words, a chronic state of fear collapse. When we've been collapsed in the past, particularly in childhood, by frightening, angry, violent, bullying, or shaming behavior from others, the fear arousal response that we may need to reactivate and complete often takes the form of a fairly violent retaliatory impulse, which is a fear arousal response which expresses what our body wants to do in response to those who mistreated us. From a therapeutic point of view, it's possible to complete these impulses in the imagination. And this has the same effect as physical action in terms of switching off our fear responses, because there's a very close overlap between the parts of the brain governing imagination and those controlling our physical movements. Let me give an example of working with the retaliatory impulse using imagination. My client Christine was a young woman with an early history of emotional neglect who'd been driven from her job by a bully and at the same time abandoned by her husband. And she'd been forced to move to a different area of the country and accept a job at a lower grade. She wanted to get a job at her original grade, but whenever she applied for a new job, she failed the interview because she went into fear collapse. Her body felt deflated, her legs went weak, and her mind blanked. In her current job, another bully dominated the team she worked with. Excuse me. And she felt powerless to voice her opinions within the team. I gradually helped Christine to get in touch with her retaliatory impulses towards those who'd mistreated her and to feel okay about having these impulses. Shortly afterwards, in a team meeting at work, frustrated by her bullying colleagues' dominating behavior, she found herself imagining slamming this person's head into the ground repeatedly with real force. And the next moment, she found herself speaking out. She challenged the bully, survived the counterattack, and ended up with most of the team supporting her viewpoint. Further work on her retaliatory impulses helped her to focus on sensations in her arms. She reflected on what her arms wanted to do. They wanted to violently shake the first bully who had driven her out of a better paid job. And I encouraged her to imagine doing this. Following that session, she reported she was much calmer. And she mentioned shuddering in bed before falling asleep that night. Soon after that, she managed 2 interviews without collapse and got a job at her original grade. Now, this account of slamming the bully's head into the ground might have elicited a joyous yes from some of you, but it may also have made others feel really uncomfortable. So I just want to explain something about our retaliatory impulses. it's very common for people to be alarmed by the violence, power, and brutality of these kill or be killed responses. And many people won't admit to such imaginings, even to their therapist, incorrectly seeing them as evidence that they are a bad or a sick person. However, retaliatory impulses are normal and morally neutral, neither good nor bad. They are simply information. And we have absolutely no control over the thoughts and imaginings that arise from our fear responses. We exercise control in not acting out these impulses on others. But if we can accept the violent imaginings they generate without fear and as being useful information about something that needs to be rectified in our lives, they can become a pathway to recovery from depressive collapse. You may not need therapy for this. Perhaps the next time you imagine pushing your partner under a bus, don't get in a guilty flap about it. Just accept that something has made you furious with them. Own your anger and use its energy for sorting out the problem. Consider what you want to be different about the relationship and start talking about it with your partner. This, of course, assumes that you're not in a coercive or a violent relationship. If you are, perhaps use the energy of your anger to reach out to others who can offer practical help to get you to a place of more safety. To go back to Christine's story, when she was reconnected with her body's physical impulses in response to mistreatment and was able to complete them, her fear system could switch off. Her description of shuddering in bed afterwards was her body's natural response of neurogenic tremoring, which happens when the fear system resets in a safe place. There's a video example of this happening in the wild in my 2024 Festival of Ideas talk on YouTube. The reactivation of retaliatory impulses rounded off with the tremoring restored Christine to normal vitality after a long period of depressive paralysis. And this same principle of reactivating fear arousal, the retaliatory impulse, in order to escape from being trapped in fear collapse, explains the effectiveness of other ways of working in therapy that encourage the physical expression of anger in a safe context, such as voicing angry thoughts with real energy or physically punching a cushion. And I'm just going to summarize the main points I've covered in that section on working with the body. Our fear responses are primarily physical and physiological. They are body reactions. Being stuck in fear mode with constant activation of fear responses has a long-term impact on the body, which helps to keep us stuck. Talking therapy is often not enough for resetting the fear system. We need to work directly with the body. Psychoeducation is important to reduce our fear of our body's responses. Chronic tension often prevents the fear system from resetting, as we saw in Sally's story. The body may need to complete its physical fear responses, connecting with our retaliatory impulses, in order to reset the fear system, as we saw with Christine. And if this doesn't happen, we can get stuck in a depressive paralysis. The response which needs completion is often a retaliatory impulse. And retaliatory impulses are normal and morally neutral, neither good nor bad. They are useful information which indicate what we need to do. And they can be a pathway to recovery. Okay, we've got to another rest break. So let's just close our eyes for a few minutes and focus all your attention on the sensations caused in your body by your breathing. Okay, and once again, let's re-energize the body. Standing and sitting a few times. And then maybe releasing a bit of tension, bottom of the spine, and the shoulders, and the neck. Oh, it's creaking. And once again, my favorite one of a good face rub. Right. Let's hope that will see us through to the end. Share the screen again. So far, all my examples have been of successful therapeutic work. But not every client gets what they need from therapy. And in my practice, I wasn't able to help everyone who came to me for help. Why does therapy work for some people and not for others? First off, therapy may not work for us if we approach it as if it was a medical procedure. When we go to a doctor, we expect them to work out what the problem is and tell us the cure. We tend to see the work as belonging to the doctor, however misguided this is. But if we approach therapy this way, there's a probability that nothing therapeutic will happen because the work of therapy belongs to the client. Unlike a medical patient, a client is more like an explorer who hires a guide to walk alongside them and help them to find the way over a difficult stretch of territory. If an explorer doesn't do their own walking, they get nowhere and they discover nothing. One important reason why therapy sometimes doesn't work may be that the fear responses of the person seeking therapy are too powerful and too unregulated for them to be able to make use of the work. For some people, medication or mental health nursing may be needed before therapy is possible. For others, therapy might be possible if long-term work is available. It takes a very long time to recover trust and a sense of safety if these were destroyed in childhood. Another reason therapy might not work is that the therapist may be unable to sufficiently regulate their own fear responses. Any trauma in the therapist's history that has not been examined and worked with in their own therapy is a potential pothole in the road ahead. When a client raises similar issues, the therapist may be jolted into a fear response. They may simply fail to respond to the issue or deflect and change the subject. Hide behind a mask of being the expert or lose confidence. Nothing therapeutic is likely to happen in such circumstances. A further reason therapy might not work is that there are simply too many external threats in a client's life, which are undermining the process of therapy. My highly traumatized client, Laura, faced frequent external threats. Several times, the Department of Work and Pensions told her that she was no longer entitled to the benefits she relied on, causing her huge stress and emotional exhaustion. A bullying neighbor tried to turn her whole street against her. Her son stopped her seeing her grandchildren for a time. The police frequently mishandled her attempt to prosecute her father-in-law for sexual abuse, and that constantly re-traumatized her. Each of these external events threw Laura back into old fear responses of rage or collapse. So the work often felt like one step forward, two steps back. And much of the time was focused on struggling to deal with the aftermath of these issues. Too many external threats can derail the therapy. When therapy does work, its course is not smooth. Because my work with Laura was long-term, we were able to make significant progress. But this one step forward, two steps back experience is very common when working with trauma. Indeed, I'd say it's the norm. We saw with Laura how these setbacks could be caused by external difficulties and events. But an even bigger problem is our internal defensive reactions arising from past traumatic experiences. When we've been badly hurt in the past, we develop ingrained defenses to prevent a repeat of the hurt, such as not trusting others, not letting people get too close, not trying out new things. And these may prevent a repeat of past hurts, but they limit our life and they stop us flourishing. When the work of therapy helps us to modify these defenses, it can leave us feeling vulnerable, out of our comfort zone, and easily triggered into powerful fear responses. This creates a pendulum effect in the work of therapy, which is the same sort of sensation as one step forward, two steps back, because any significant progress triggers old fears. We could illustrate this in the following way. I start with a client's old defenses, and by helping him to feel safe with me and thus calming his fear system, we're able to do some work. The client takes a new step. For example, he starts to trust a friend and he experiences new feelings. As we work, this strengthens and consolidates. However, the client's now moved out of the comfort zone of his old trust no one defense. And this new experience doesn't feel very safe. So if, for example, his friend doesn't reply at once to a message, it triggers the old fear system reaction. The client then feels stupid for trusting. He feels as if he's back to square one and he's got nowhere. And this also affects me, triggering my fear of being a useless therapist. So I have to go slow and regulate myself. I try to help the client not be too alarmed at what seems to be a failure. Gradually, his fear system calms down a bit, and eventually therapist and client can do a bit more work, and this new work strengthens and consolidates. The new work might involve taking a risk that matters even more, such as being more open and honest with his partner, with a new experience of developing a greater sense of closeness. But this leaves my client even further out of his comfort zone. The smallest disruption, like his partner's inattention because of tiredness, and the fear system kicks in again, and we're back to square one. And it looks like another failure. So I slow down, regulate the fear system, help my client to get used to the pattern of the pendulum, not be too afraid of it. His fear system calms down, and he can move back to the new steps and the new feelings, and eventually can consolidate and strengthen them still further. Here's an example of one of these setbacks. My client Carol was very ambivalent about receiving care, and she had a history of pushing away potential partners and friends, leaving her isolated and depressed. But she seemed to take very well to the therapy at first. She liked my explanation of the fear system, and she liked the calming exercises I use, which helped her to explore difficult feelings that she'd had when she was 5 years old, and her mother got a new partner, leaving her feeling pushed aside and ignored. She was very cheerful and energized at the end of this session, and she thanked me for my help. Afterwards, I have to admit, I was feeling really pleased with myself and looking forward to picking up this work at our next session. But a couple of days before the session, I got a brief email from Carol cancelling the appointment, saying she'd put a check in the post for it, but she'd felt quite disturbed after the last session and thought she'd better stop counselling for the moment. Once I'd recovered from my initial deflation, I emailed her back and reminded her of a previous conversation we had had, in which I told her that when we make real progress, it might be followed by a powerful negative reaction. I acknowledged her cancellation, but said I'd be there in my room at the appointment time, and I'd be delighted to see her if she felt able to come. Carol did come to the next session and described what had happened after the previous one. She'd been feeling really pleased with the work and started thinking how she liked coming to see me and how good it was finding someone who could really listen to her. Then the old defense started up, one of the voices in her head. Stupid idiot. You know he's only doing it for the money. He doesn't give a shit about you. And suddenly Carol felt embarrassed and ashamed for having trusted me and felt really flat for days and hadn't been able to face coming back to see me. An important point to note about this experience of being thrown back to square one or taking one step forward, two steps back is that this is exactly what it feels like. And it's a very powerful feeling, hence the disruption to the therapy. But in reality, we haven't gone back to square one. The progress made has not been wiped out. The new steps and new experiences created in the therapy are underpinned by new connections being made in the brain. And these persist, even when fear throws us back into old reactions. Once we calm the fear system, we can just pick up from where we left off and consolidate and strengthen these new connections. The connections are very weak at first, but they strengthen with every repetition. That's why the work of therapy is sometimes very slow, because change happens through the making and strengthening of neural connections in the brain. It's an organic process, and we are tied to the pace of organic change. As new connections are made and strengthened in the brain, the old connections, the memories of traumatic experiences, which underpin our powerful fear responses, can be weakened to a certain extent. In the therapy room, when we help our clients to feel welcome, accepted, and safe, and when we help them to process their traumatic experiences, we are helping to rewire the brain, but this takes time. Now, as a non-scientist, I really struggle to get my head around this process, but this is the way I understand it at the moment. Trauma memories are held in the brain in patterns of connections between brain cells, neurons, which fire between each other. And here's a representation of a pattern of connections which encodes the memory of an original trauma. Bear with me. This absolutely massive oversimplification is more a metaphor than a scientific diagram. The memory is accessed when this pattern of connection activates. And after remaining active for a few hours, it then deactivates. And this locks the process. So neither the memory nor its impact on us can change until it's activated or unlocked again. Change can happen, however, when this pattern of connections is reactivated either by external triggers or when we invite someone to tell their story in a safe context of therapy. The activated pattern of connections can be changed by new experiences, which contradict or disconfirm what we learned from the original trauma. For example, new experiences within the therapy of feeling safe or being properly listened to or having our competence affirmed or gaining a new perspective on the initial trauma can be added to these connections as an extension to the memories, thereby gradually changing them. And as you can see, I am very crudely using green to indicate new benign associations in contrast to red traumatic associations. The altered pattern remains active once again for a few hours and then it deactivates. It reactivates in the next therapy session, and further benign associations are added to the network, which then deactivates. It reactivates again in the following session with the addition of more benign associations. And over time, with each repetition and the addition of benign associations, traumatic memories are softened, their emotional charge dampened. So at a certain point, the activation of these networks will no longer trigger an activation of the fear system that can't be regulated. And once the fear system can regulate, trauma symptoms start to disappear. But once again, we're biological organisms and we must work at the pace of organic change. We may well see sudden change when a trauma network is eventually altered to the extent that it no longer triggers a fear system response. But with complex trauma, that can take a long time. When fear can be regulated, this brings about great changes. The fear system can turbocharge our energy in short spurts, but in constant activation, it hugely drains us of energy. So if it deactivates, this releases enormous energy for all the things we really want to do with our life. We also regain our ability to reflect, to learn, to take in new things. We can recover a desire to be sociable, a pleasure in the company of others, an improvement in the quality of our intimate relationships. And in that closer connectedness, we have a source of support and safety that further helps us to regulate our fear responses. Taken together, these changes are transformational. I think, however, that when we've been stuck in fear mode for a long time, we retain a vulnerability to getting stuck again when we encounter further serious threats to the self, such as a relationship breakup, a redundancy, a car accident, a major illness. These can trap us again in fear mode. Some theorists say that trauma processing can erase the networks in the brain that encoded the memory of previous trauma. But I don't believe this. It makes no sense to me, either in theory or in terms of my own experience and my work with many clients. Going back to my previous illustration, though we may dampen the ability of these networks to trigger fear responses in the present, what you might call the shadow of the trauma still exists in brain and body. As I see it, there is never a complete cure. However, there's a possibility that over time, the impact of past trauma may diminish and we will become able to live our lives more fully. We've been looking at what happens in the therapy room between therapist and client. I've observed that the healing core of therapy is bringing someone out of the isolation of fear into the connectedness of love, of social engagement. I want now to step outside of the therapy room and observe that this healing process does not solely belong to therapy. It belongs to all of us. The dynamic we've looked at in the therapy room of care seeking and caregiving, of fear being activated and either intensifying or being regulated. That same dynamic is happening all the time in all our relationships with our partners, parents, children, friends, work colleagues, and random strangers. We are triggering or regulating each other's fear systems all the time. I'm going to finish with a few reflections arising out of looking at fear in the therapy room that might be pertinent to our everyday struggles with the fear system. We cannot control other people's fear responses, but we can start to get a better control of our own. And this will have a ripple effect onto others. When we try to help others, we may find that some people's fear responses are too powerful to be resolved in the short term. Our caregiving fails to alleviate their distress, and that distresses us too. Maybe don't give up on them, but don't expect miracles of yourself, apart from the miracle of learning to be endlessly patient. When we help others to make changes in their lives, we see the same pendulum effect I've just talked about. Constant setbacks, feeling we're back to square one. But setbacks are not failures, and slow and change is a slow, organic process. We need to wake up to the fact that a huge amount of human distress is down to the external difficulties people are having to struggle with. So let's not pathologize their distress and make out that they're the problem. Rather than the problem being a violent, divided, unequal, and disordered world, which we all have a responsibility to fix. Accept your retaliatory impulses. Don't be afraid of your fear responses, whether that's powerful anger or even the desire to do nasty things to someone else. Just use this as information. Your fear system has been activated. Granted, you need to keep an eye on it and regulate it, but it's telling you something isn't right and needs sorting out. Attend to that. We look around us every day now at the stupidity and nastiness we see growing exponentially throughout the world. But it's helpful to reflect that when we get stuck in fear, we are all disconnected, antisocial, retaliatory, and non-reflective. To put it really crudely, fear turns us stupid and nasty, all of us. And it's important we can acknowledge that. It's also important to acknowledge that those we think of as stupid and nasty are probably in the grip of fear and might be quite different people if they were able to experience real safety. Is there anything we could do to help with that? My key message is this. The better we get at regulating our own fear responses, the more we are able to exercise the greatest power that we all have in us as human beings, a healing power, helping others to feel welcome, to find a sense of safety, and so bringing others out of fear, which means bringing them out of isolation and misery into connectedness and a full, flourishing human life. The good enough therapist has that transforming power. So do you. Thank you for listening.
Well, that was brilliant, Michael. I can tell you. Look, I hope you can see reflections.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Right.
Should I just do a little bit of business before we get to the questions? Where are we? Oh, yeah. Any therapists who would like a CPD certificate, there's a QR code here that will get you through to the feedback questionnaire that will get you a certificate. And I think, Dmitry, you're putting that onto chat. Yeah. My book that this talk is based on is published on the 25th of June, but it's actually available now from Hammersmith Books on special offer that we negotiated with them through the Complex Trauma Institute. So its full price is $19.99 plus post and packing. And Hammersmith Books will offer it to us for £10.99 plus £5 post and packing. And that's for the paperback and a free ebook, or $6.99 for the ebook only instead of $9.99. So there's a QR code which will get you through to Hammersmith Books. And I think Dmitry is going to put a link.
I already put links, so you don't need
to put links. Great. Okay.
Click on the link or QR code, whatever you prefer.
But basically, when you order the book, once you go to the basket, you'll find a coupon code box and enter FEAR26 for the paperback or the paperback and the free ebook, or FEAR26E for the ebook alone, and just click the apply coupon. Just a word about the book. It's addressed to therapists, but it's written so that everyone can understand it. So I've taken out all the counseling jargon and all the difficult words and stuff that usually shuts my mind down. So a lot of people who aren't therapists have found it of real interest. So do have a look into it. And we're going to move on to questions, but we're left with, where are we? About not many minutes left because we're finishing at past. So I'm going to take a few questions, but if you're stuck, if you're left without a question answered, please contact me. I love correspondence. So if there's a question that I can answer, get in touch. So let me just
answer. So Karen answer. Off. Please open feedback form. So in feedback form, you have to put your name, exactly how you want to appear in certificate. So I hope, Karen, you can hear me. So you need to open feedback form, complete feedback form. Carry on. So did you open Q&A? So
yes, I've opened Q&A. There's a question.
Will slides or not? Yes or no?
Will we be able to see slides afterwards? Well, on YouTube, there's going to be a video of the whole thing. So
you're going to share slides because we're going to put on our website.
I can send you the slides, Dmitry, if you want.
Thank you.
That's no problem.
Move.
Now, I'm working with someone who has violent retaliatory impulses expressed in the safe container of a drawing made by himself. However, there's some evidence that this person struggles to understand the difference between imaginative reality and day-to-day reality, and concerned, therefore, that they might act out their impulses in real life. What are your thoughts about this? I'm not sure how much help I can be with this, because where you may be dealing with really quite a deep level of disturbance there. There's one thing that I touch on in the book, And that's that I think each therapist is drawn to the level of their own trauma and the area of their own trauma. Um, and I've actually always been a bit of a middle of the road man, and therefore in my practice, I've tended not to work with the most profound disturbances, and where supervisees have worked with someone with really profound disturbance, I've usually found them another supervisor for that particular work. So I think I'm sort of a bit out of my depth with this one. I mean, yes, there are some people that have levels of disturbances very difficult to deal with um, in therapy, and particularly in private practice. I think it's different when you're working in the NHS, as I was for some years, you know, where you've got a big network behind you and you have psychiatrists you consult with. So my advice there would be to think about who can you consult with there who actually deals with that level of disturbance. I hope that's helpful. Let's just look
Do
at
you
this.
mind if I enable so Sarah, you put hand? I just enable your microphone, Sarah. You can
Okay,
actually,
let's hear. Thank you.
if you want to.
Hello, Sarah.
I'm not sure
Oh,
if
they're still
yeah.
muted as far as I can see.
Mhm.
Sarah's still muted.
Unless she put
Can
hand.
you
But
hear Sarah? Can you unmute?
we have another question from Angela. So if you open chat, literally it's the last in the chat. If nervous system change happens through repeated experiences over time, how do you work with that? A reality in short-term therapy. So yeah, short-term therapy where we are often our goal focused in
Oh gosh, gosh.
yeah.
Short term therapy. I think sometimes therapists are stuck between a rock and a hard place when they have to work with very powerful fear disturbances in short term. Um, the more serious types of complex trauma really require long term work. I think a lot of therapists get traumatized, you know, because they're put in situations they simply shouldn't be put in. Um, and I suppose that's something of what I touched on with the thing about therapy sometimes doesn't work because there are too many external threats. You know, it's a bit like if someone was, I mean, perhaps you know, in Ukraine, where people are in situations of warfare all the time, you can't regulate and shut down the fear system because they need the fear system to be active. So sometimes therapy is just a bit further down the road, and the job in the present is survive.
Okay, and we have Q&A. If you open Q&A,
Okay, I've got one on Q&A about I'd like some suggestions how to manage the activation of the fear system in the moment in the therapy room for the therapist. I have some ideas for up and down regulation, but always open to more learning. Well, I suppose one point I make about that, one of the things I actually found from my training with Una McCluskey is that particularly when you're dealing with moderate to severe complex trauma, you're actually having to regulate the activation of your fear system over and over and over again, you know, just within the one session. The way I would start would be posture. You know, so one of the things, if when your body sort of collapses like that, if you actually just sit yourself up straight and get your feet on the floor and get your body into a place where you can breathe properly, right down into the abdomen. There's a thing. I think Peter Levine calls it a kick on the vagal brake, a deep sigh. Like that. It's actually difficult doing these things if the client knows nothing about fear regulation. So I always found it really good to actually teach something about fear regulation, so then I could do this stuff as it happens. But you're having to do that constantly. and then actually I would address breathing things. So if I'd gone into an absolute slump of a collapse, I would do a very, very long in breath and a very short out breath repeatedly, because that is actually raising heart rate. Or if I was in a state of arousal or, panicky or that, I then reverse that. It's like the balloon's overinflated. So I deflate it by very, very long out breaths and then short in breaths, the same pattern as you have with singing. I hope that's sufficient.
Maybe last two questions. So
sure, last two questions.
Sonia
Who we've got?
Victoria. Sonia, I know of client.
Where is this? Is this
Q&A?
Q&A, right? Oh yeah, I know of a client who experiences extreme fear of therapists or doctors, which isn't the only one, particularly because of traumatic experiences and partly because someone caring feels like a threat at the same time. So even speaking with professionals can trigger severe dissociative symptoms. Sessions are almost never possible without dissociation. Any advice on working with reactions like this? My only advice is slowly. It's once again we've been sold this absolute fraud in this country, through the NHS and the IAP program, that brief working and you can sort people and get them back to work. It's nonsense. Where you're talking about this sort of profound impact of the fear system, it absolutely takes time. And as a therapist, you have to know that it takes time. You have to know that you're not a miracle worker. You're just a human being like anyone else, and anyone else has profound difficulties with this. So we just have to be really patient, go really slowly. This sort of thing is going to throw us into fear collapse all the time. So we really need to look after ourselves in the rest of our life. We really need to look at the other caregiving demands on us so that we're not drained or overwhelmed. Okay, I think one more question.
Victoria, so can you give advice how to work with fear system in Ukraine now?
Oh gosh, do you know, I'm out of my depth there. I have been brought up in the UK. I've spent 70 odd years here, and it's been mostly for me a peaceful country. I think we've been lucky because in terms of the amount of warfare in the history of the human race, we've been through quite a patch in this country without warfare. God knows what's going to happen in the future with the current state of affairs. So I don't actually viscerally know what it's like to be in a situation of warfare. I think in warfare, we just have to survive and look after each other. The therapy bit, that's down the line. We need to stand by people, be with them, give them cups of tea, hold their hand, regulate them, help them to run.
Practical, yeah.
Absolutely. Practical stuff. Forget all the theoretical stuff until later. Once you've got the Russians out of the country,
then you will start
to settle down. Then you can start to look after each other properly. But don't think you can perform miracles in the middle of warfare. It's shit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Michael.
And thank you, everyone.
Just want to say there are more questions, and I know I've seen Basia.
Please write to me. I love correspondence. It keeps me alive. It keeps
me suggest you? I'm texting again.
Ideas.
I just sending again. So please, I just texted again. Please grab email, Michael's email, and if you have questions, please write to him. And may I ask Michael to promise you will come back to us, maybe September, October. We will have Q&A where you will be answering questions, maybe longer, like 40 minutes.
Absolutely. No problem. Love to do that.
Okay. So everyone, really recommend this book. It makes a lot of sense. It's not because I'm trying to sell here. This book really become a guide. It's a guide for lots of therapists now already. So thank you, Michael. I feel lucky to have to have you here today. So everyone,
thank you, Dmitry, and thank you everyone for giving up your time to listen this evening. Take care, all of you.
Stay safe, everyone, and to our friends in Ukraine, stay safe as well. Survive, as Michael said.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yep.